Today I thought it would be fun if I brought you along to my job on Broadway while I talked about how I got there, how I started working at Aladdin on Broadway as someone who works in wardrobe while I was pursuing acting. Yeah, I'm just going to tell you how that all worked out. But first we're going to make some tea. I'm not a coffee drinker, so I start my mornings with usually a warm spiced tea, particularly chai. I'm a big tea person. I love all sorts of teas, and I've been branching out with different flavors, different types. I'm usually not a fruity tea drinker, but I do like peach tea every now and then. And I've been experimenting with anti-inflammatory drinks. I love learning about the nutrition side of like teas and herbs and things like that. I think that's really interesting. I probably need it. My face is a little puffy this morning. So let me show you what I've been making. This is something that I recently started doing. This is hibiscus tea. Basically, I bought a big bag of organic hibiscus flowers. They're like dried flowers. And I soak it in water overnight, and it turns into this very deep red cranberry-like juice. And I don't put any sugar or anything in it. It is kind of tangy. It kind of is like cranberry juice. And if you boil it, it gets a little bitter because of all the tannins and everything. But so this has been fun. My husband really likes it too. And it's anti-inflammatory. It has all these really healthy properties. So I drink this during the day. It's just like a regular drink. I don't drink it as like my morning tea. And then in my water bottle, I'm going to put in my lemon ginger drink. So this is just a bunch of ginger that I cut up, that I grated into the water. And I think there's 3 whole lemons in here and some honey. So this is very anti-inflammatory. It kind of tastes like an interesting lemonade. And I also put some cayenne pepper in there as well. So it's a little spicy, a little tangy, has a little bite. It's really good. I like to start out my mornings with a little workout, which I didn't have a ton of time this morning, so I did just a little bit on the treadmill. I like to make breakfast, get a little protein in before I leave, which I'm really pushing it here with the time, but that's okay. We'll see what we can get done. Pack my bag, and then I drive to the train, take the train in, and then walk to the theater. So that's kind of my Broadway routine right now. I've been very much enjoying this tea my sister got me for my birthday. It's Crimson Chai. It's from a little tea shop in Montclair. And it has rooibos, I don't know if I'm saying that right, cinnamon, ginger, clove, and cardamom. Full flavored cardamom spice. It's very good. It's very, very Christmassy.
So how did I end up working on Broadway's Aladdin? I guess it started over 20 years ago as a little 7-year-old learning to sew. My mom and both my grandmothers were accomplished seamstresses, so I was constantly around it growing up. I remember my first sewing project was a pink bunny doll. I didn't understand seam allowance at the time and was disappointed that it ended up being too small to turn inside out. I ended up ripping it, not being able to stuff it with cotton, and unfortunately had to give up on the project. As I got older, my mom taught me how to make clothes for my American Girl dolls, and pretty soon I was making whole wardrobes all by myself. My sisters and I didn't really watch much TV as kids, and that is one thing I'm really thankful for today. I'm extremely behind on pop culture because of this, but my creative muscles were strengthened as a kid, and today I find I am almost never bored. These were the days before there were iPads for learning, and the internet wasn't what it was today. I spent many summer afternoons in a homemade fort, outside, with my baby goat, while my mom would read to us. We read Little House on the Prairie, the American Girl series, Dear America Diaries, and of course, Childhood of Famous Americans. My mom would make us little prairie bonnets, little house dresses, and Christmas dresses inspired by the American Girl books. I loved it. Because I was homeschooled, I had no shame about wearing these dresses out in public. So there I was, prancing around ShopRite in my Revolutionary War-inspired dress that my mother had made for me. I won't tell you how old I was when I stopped doing this. When I was 13, I attended a homeschool Civil War ball reenactment. This called for a ball gown of epic proportions, of course. My mother made me a beautiful gown, and I bought a hoop skirt as well. The year before I started taking classes at the community college, I spent a lot of time with my mom focusing on learning how to really sew. That was the year things started to click. The year after that, I started fashion design classes at the community college. As time went on, however, I realized that the fashion industry was just as competitive as the acting industry, but with much less stage time. In spite of that, I was a headliner in the fashion show at the college and modeled my Don Juan Phantom of the Opera inspired dress. At that point, I realized that I wanted to put all my efforts into acting and see where that would get me. And my goodness, has it given me many opportunities that I never would have dreamed of. In December of 2015, my mom passed away. I remember looking at my sewing machine, sitting on my mom's old sewing table, and wondered what my relationship with it would look like now. What had once been a never-ending source of creativity was now a painful reminder of all that I had lost. It became the dumping grounds for sympathy cards I no longer had the energy to read. When the grief began to lift and I found my feet again, I realized I still wanted to sew and be creative. I found my mom's fabric stash, and I realized it was mine to do whatever I wanted with. A thrill of excitement went through me, but then a pang of guilt as I felt bad for being excited to use it. I quickly realized it would be silly to feel guilty, though, because I knew my mom would like nothing more for me to continue to sew. Like Josefina's sister in the American Girl books I had read as a child, I found that this skill was a constant reminder of my mother in a way that nothing else could be. Every time I worked on a project, I could almost hear my mother's voice. I knew what she would say and what her thoughts and comments would be on my sewing. I knew when she would suggest I push myself a little farther if I was getting lazy with a project. I also knew when she would be impressed and full of praise. There was no possible way I could ever forget what my mother's presence felt like. I would never stop sewing, therefore I could never forget. This was a wonderful revelation. The winter after she passed, I found a skirt that she had begun making for a Christmas dress. I made a bodice for it and wore it to Christmas Eve service at church that year. It was like we had sewn a dress together, even though she was in heaven. At that point in my life, I had a thriving nanny business during the week, and on the weekends I would do community theater. I helped costume shows and continued sewing my own costumes in my free time. Having no real degree, though, I did often wonder what I would do if acting didn't work out. At the ripe old age of 23, when most people are graduating college, I was accepted into an acting program on a scholarship in New York City. I was thrilled. I was learning from professionals who were active in the Broadway industry. Classes were held right in Pearl Studios, where Broadway auditions took place. During peak audition season, we were tripping over dancers lining the hallways, trying to get to class or skipping class altogether to audition ourselves. It was a time, and I loved it. I gained so much experience, and I feel like being a little older actually gave me an advantage. I knew myself better, I was familiar with many of my strengths and weaknesses, and I was able to apply correction better than in previous years. The timing was perfect. During the fall semester, the whole class was split into two groups. One group was going to be taking a clowning class, while the other would be taking scene study or something like that. I was put in the clowning class, which I believe was providential. We had the coolest clown teacher who was ever so passionate about clowning. She had studied in France at an elite clowning school, and the exercises she had us do were unmatched. I remember one time where she had us sit in a line and laugh for 4 minutes straight. At one point, my laughing turned into sobbing, and I asked her if I could just sit there and cry for the rest of the exercise, to which she agreed. It was great. I expressed so many emotions in her class. Another time, we had to talk about an experience through song, so I started talking about some childhood memories, all while singing it in opera. I really felt seen in that class. For one of the classes, she asked us to bring in costumes for the next assignment we would be working on. That was music to my ears, and I pulled something from my costume collection that I had made 2 years prior and proudly wore it to class. My teacher seemed interested, perhaps even impressed when I told her I sewed it myself. "I know a job that would be good for you," she mentioned. I was quite intrigued, as I knew she was a dresser at Aladdin on Broadway. I stayed after class and we talked a little bit about wardrobe jobs and what being a dresser on Broadway was. A few weeks later, she recommended me for a gala performance at a hotel in the city. I was a dresser for some of the actors for a one-night gig. It was my first paid dressing job, and I was so excited. I continued with school until spring and found myself back to square one. I moved back home and needed to make money, so I found a family that needed a part-time nanny, and that was that. I loved the family, but I knew I needed to continue to pursue acting and potentially wardrobe. In the fall of that year, my former clowning teacher and I reconnected, and she passed on my resume and cover letter. Very shortly after, I was called in to trail some tracks as a swing dresser, which means learning the show as a dresser. A dresser, in Broadway wardrobe, is the person who dresses usually 1 to 3 actors throughout the show. At least that's how it is at Aladdin. They are in charge of presetting all the costumes before the show, which is a skill in itself. Shoes have to be laid out in a certain direction, certain closures on costumes must be opened while others must stay closed, some costumes must be turned inside out with the sleeves set just so that the actors can slip into their costumes seamlessly. There's a certain lineup you must walk in backstage during certain numbers so that no one is tripping over anyone else. At other times, there is a stampede of actors leaving the stage and off to intermission or the next scene. During those moments, one must flatten themselves against the costume racks unless you want to cause a traffic block. A swing dresser is basically an understudy for every other dresser's track. So instead of just learning 1 to 3 actors' costumes tracks, I had to learn all 30, which came down to about 15 tracks. I vigorously took notes, photos, and tried to absorb all I could. There was just as much choreography backstage as there was on stage. I would leave the show completely exhausted but so hyped up. I was working on a Broadway show and I couldn't have been prouder. My passion to be a Broadway actor only grew as I saw the actors night after night dance and sing with all their might. I also saw up close just how exhausting and demanding it was. It was also bright and shiny, and the cast and crew were such a blast to be around. Aladdin is known as Broadway's biggest party, and it certainly is. I'm not sure what was more entertaining, the actual Broadway show or the shenanigans backstage. But then, in March of 2020, it all came to a screeching halt with the rest of the world. Some feared Broadway would never come back or be what it once was. Thankfully, the naysayers were wrong and Broadway reemerged. The lights went up once again, and the party came back. During that time, I got married, took some more acting classes, and was trying to figure out what my next move was. As Providence would have it once again, my clowning teacher reached out with a question regarding a sewing project for a friend. She also mentioned that there were some day work spots opening back up at the theater. At this point, Broadway had been back for a year and a half. I pondered the idea a little and decided to see if I could go back. In 2 weeks' time, I was back at Aladdin, but this time working on costumes before the actors even got to the theater. This was a whole new side of wardrobe that I was eager to see. Day work is essentially checking over the costumes, taking care of any repairs that are found, and steaming and ironing before the show that night. While it is a much quieter atmosphere during the day, it is no less exciting. The theater has a certain resting calmness about it, as if it's taking a nap before the night's festivities take place. Wardrobe and crew are bustling about, taking care of tasks, and making sure everything is safe and in order for the show. Every now and then there's a put-in rehearsal where a new actor joins the show, or there's a field trip of young theater lovers who are taking a backstage tour during our workday. I often listen to podcasts or call friends while my hands are busy stitching and gluing. I love that I get to use my unique skill set and be a part of this beautiful industry. I take great pride in my work, this show and the wardrobe union that makes it possible to have a career doing something I love while pursuing being an actor myself. I sometimes think back and wonder what my clowning teacher saw in me that made her suggest I try pursuing this career. The experiences I've had getting to be part of this Broadway show are invaluable. I've grown and learned things about myself, made dear friends, and get to experience the Broadway industry in a way I never expected. I sometimes like to think how proud my mom would be if she knew what I was up to today. I like to think she does. Her years of sharing her passion with me paid off in ways I don't think she could have ever imagined. I'm grateful for everyone who has shared their knowledge with me throughout the years, which has shaped much of who I am today. I know God positioned people in my life at the right times and gave me opportunities I wouldn't have thought of myself. Looking back on what has happened in my life so far genuinely makes me excited for all the things that I haven't done yet.